from Kinston, North Carolina. And welcome to our Wesley Bible study. We have a sparse crowd today, but very intellectually advanced. And and we're going to be doing Numbers chapters 6 and 7. And we're not going to be spending a lot of time on 7, but 6 is interesting. So we'll focus in on that mostly. Okay, chapter 6. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazirite," okay, that's a specific kind of vow, "to separate themselves to the Lord, they shall separate themselves from wine and strong drink. They shall drink no wine vinegar or other vinegar, and shall not drink any grape juice or eat grapes fresh or dried. All their days as Nazirites, they shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins." Great day. What's going on here? It reminds me a little bit of when I first went into ministry. And at that time, there was a requirement in my early stages, in my probationary stages for ministry, there was a requirement that ministers, United Methodist ministers, be teetotalers. You could not drink. And so when, well, no, I take that back. That was changed. Actually, it was withdrawn from the Book of Discipline by the time I was up for probationary membership in the conference. Back then they would call us deacons, but that's all been changed around. So anyway, as a deacon, I had to take vows with the bishop. Well, the bishop asks you a series of questions on whether or not you agree with the doctrines of the church and everything else. And one of the questions that used to be a standard part of the preparation for ministry, the qualification for ministry, was that you would not drink. Okay, well, he should not have asked us that, but he did. And if I wanted to get a probationary membership that day, I had to take that vow. Okay, so while I was a probationary member of the conference, I did not drink, except that I was going to Duke Divinity School at the time, and the only time that I had alcohol was when they served communion at Duke Divinity School. How about that? But when I became an elder, we had a different bishop, and thank God. Now, anyway. So anyway, this Nazirite vow is it's not really clear in the scriptures what a Nazirite vow is, but we do have examples of Nazirites, okay? Typically, a Nazirite vow is one that is for a specific period of time. It's like when we celebrate Lent. What are you giving up for Lent? Kind of thing, okay? Only it's much more intense. It has a definite bearing on your standing in the community. It is not limited to the priesthood or the Levites. It can include them, but it's not limited to them. So any man, any woman can take a Nazirite vow, and for that period of time, they are dedicated entirely to the Lord. Now, what they're doing as a part of that vow is not explained, okay? Except that there are a lot of prohibitions that are associated with the vow. So you can tell that a person is a Nazirite because of some of the characteristics that you'll see as we go through this. And they are held in very high regard by the community. The standards are pretty strict, okay? Now, we don't know, like I say, we don't know what their activity as Nazirites are. Do they have to withdraw from a vocation? Apparently, that's not the case. Do they have to remain celibate? That's not the case. I don't know what they're doing or what they're not doing. I know what they're not doing as a Nazirite, but I don't know what they're doing, okay? So let's look at all the second thing. Examples of Nazirites, okay? You have Samuel was a Nazirite, not by choice. There are several Nazirites that are not by choice. They are by birth. It was a commitment made by their parents. Okay, so Samson was another one. He was a Nazirite at birth and supposed to remain a Nazirite for life. Samuel was the same way. He was supposed to be a Nazirite for life. There are similar things in the New Testament. Paul calls upon Christians to be dedicated to the Lord and separate from the communities in which they live. But he did not include all the prohibitions that went along with the Nazirite. In fact, the Apostle Paul advocated that people who are Christians should not should not necessarily dress in a way that is distinctive from the community around them. But he said, don't make fun of people who do, because they're doing this to honor God. And because they're doing that to honor God, you don't make fun of them or demean them or treat them, don't discriminate against them. And this would fall into categories like when you see Hasidic Jews, or if you see Mennonites that dress in a characteristic way. And there are other religious sects. I know when I was growing up in the Church of the Nazarene, there were some very specific strictures on the way women could dress or how they wore their hair. Usually it was several generations out of date. But anyway, not so much on the men, okay? More on the women. But so there is this kind of understanding that a Christian should be dedicated. Your body is the temple of the Lord, kind of understanding of how Christians are engaged in this sort of thing. The church I grew up in was a Church of the Nazarene, so Jesus was considered a Nazarene, but not because he was a Nazirite. It's because he grew up in the village of Nazareth. Okay. All the days of their Nazirite vow, no razor shall come upon the head until the time is completed for which they separate themselves to the Lord. They shall be holy. They shall let the locks of the head grow long. And that's one of the reasons why you see in Hasidic Judaism that the men will have long hair or curls on the corners of their head. All the days that they separate themselves to the Lord, they shall not go near a corpse. Even if their father or mother, brother or sister should die, they may not defile themselves, because their consecration to God is upon the head. All their days as Nazirites, they shall be holy to the Lord. Okay? Which is kind of interesting, because if you're not a Nazirite, aren't you also supposed to be holy to the Lord, because you're a holy people, kind of thing. Anyway, I love this part. If someone suddenly dies nearby, defiling the head of the Nazirite, then they shall shave the head on the day of their cleansing. On the 7th day they shall shave it. On the 8th day they shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer one as a purification offering, the other as a burnt offering, and make atonement for them, because they incurred guilt by reason of the corpse. They shall sanctify the head that same day, and separate themselves to the Lord for their days as Nazirites, and bring a male lamb a year old as a guilt offering. The former time shall be void, because the Nazirite was defiled. So you do not pass go, you do not collect $200. All the time that you spent being a Nazirite prior to that does not count, so you've got to extend your vow in order to fulfill the time frame, because somebody dropped dead next to you.
They kept up with all this.
They did. They did. And they kept up with it meticulously, because always a portion of whatever offerings they brought went to the priesthood. Nazirites were a very lucrative business for the priests. Okay?
When they say near a corpse, what do they mean?
They mean somebody dropped dead next to you,
They
and
didn't touch them.
yeah, well, even if it looks like even a proximity, you shouldn't even be close to one. So if somebody dropped dead, huh?
How do the Nazarites make money?
The priest did.
Okay, but you're saying that Nazarites was a good business.
It was because they always brought offerings as part of their vows.
Okay.
Lots of offerings. Okay?
Okay.
And because they had lots of offerings as part of their vows, it was cost effective for the priest to get as many Nazarites into the business as possible.
So who made all these laws about how Nazarites were supposed to live?
Obviously, priests.
Obviously.
Okay? The book of Numbers is heavily edited by what we call the priestly editor. Okay, so you're going to see things that maintain the institution of priesthood and temple worship and that sort of thing included in this. A lot of this is developed. If you're unclean and you've got to get an offering to be clean, the 2 turtle doves and all that stuff, then who gets that? Yeah.
Did they avoid funerals altogether? What did they do?
Oh yeah, they would avoid funerals. They didn't go to funerals. They didn't participate in anything that had anything to do with dead people.
Is there a logic behind that?
No.
Okay.
Not one that is presently evident. There was a tremendous amount of logic associated with it at the time.
Obviously, the dead body was.
Yes. You have to understand that logic is all based on an original premise. Okay?
So who did deal with the bodies?
The rest of the family.
And the poor Nazarite couldn't go to the funeral or,
No.
or mourn or with everybody else.
Well, on the one hand, the poor Nazarite didn't have to do all the stuff that they might otherwise be required to do. So, if you have somebody who's deathly ill and you just don't want to mess with them, you might become a Nazarite.
So you don't have to deal with
Yeah, right.
So when they died, they basically violated their own code.
That's true. That's true. Okay, but they couldn't bring offerings anyway, so, yeah, if they died, then I guess the vows were complete by the time they died. That's the way it works. All right. This is the law for the Nazarites when the time of their consecration has been completed. See, it's not just the going in, it's also the coming out. All right? They shall be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they shall offer their gift to the Lord, 1 male lamb a year without blemish as a burnt offering, 1 ewe lamb a year old without blemish as a purification offering. This kind of goes into the stock of the priesthood. 1 ram without blemish as an offering of well-being. Okay, portions of that were consumables. And a basket of unleavened bread, cakes of choice flour mixed with oil, and unleavened wafers spread with oil, with their grain offering and their drink offerings. The priest shall present them before the Lord and offer their purification offering and burnt offering, and offer the ram as a sacrifice of well-being to the Lord with the basket of unleavened bread. The priest shall also make the accompanying grain offering and drink offering. See, you got all this. You got a whole meal. Yeah. See, like I say, they want as many Nazarites as possible. Okay. Then the Nazarite shall shave the consecrated head at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and shall take the hair from the consecrated head and put it on the fire under the sacrifice of well-being. Well, that would not be a consumable, I would think. Anyway, the priest shall take the shoulder of the ram when it is boiled, and 1 unleavened cake out of the basket, and 1 unleavened wafer, and shall put them in the palms of the Nazarite after they have shaved the consecrated head. Then the priest shall elevate them as an elevation offering before the Lord. They are a holy portion for the priest. Okay? The Lord make... Oh, that's wrong there. Okay. Let me make sure I got the right place here. There we go. The priest, together with the breast that is elevated and the thigh that is offered, after that the Nazarites may drink wine. They'll probably need it. This is the law for the Nazarites who takes a vow. Their offering to the Lord must be in accordance with the Nazarite vow, apart from what else they can afford. Yeah. in accordance with whatever vow they take, so they shall do, following the law for the consecration. So evidently, there were different levels of vows, different duties to perform or something, and there was also a kind of sliding scale of offerings that went along with those.
The richer you were, the more money you gave.
That's right. That's right.
So-
Or the more intense your vow.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there were some disqualifiers. Okay. If you were an unwed female, your father could cancel your vow. Okay. If you were married, your husband could cancel your vow.
But could they also dedicate you as a Nazarite, like we know Samson and Samuel were at birth?
Yeah,
So
their
could-
mamas did.
Right, so could their spouse and father at a different age other than at birth?
I guess the father could have canceled the vow.
But could somebody other than you make that vow once you're not a baby? Once you're old
No,
enough-
nobody can make the vow on your behalf.
Unless you're an infant.
Right. Right. Now, Samson violated every vow. Okay, except for the haircut. Samson was among a lot of dead people because he killed a lot of Philistines. So he was always communing with the dead because he was killing them, okay, by the hundreds. Evidently, Samson had no compunction of eating, drinking, and fornicating with Philistines. So as far as Nazarites go, he wasn't especially devout. He only came to his senses and fulfilled his vows when he dropped the Philistine temple on himself and everybody around him.
So Nazarites weren't, they didn't fight.
They did.
But there's death.
Yeah, well, Samson fought. That's what we
I know
know.
he did, but would others?
Possibly not.
I mean,
Depending on-
fight, become a Nazarite.
Well, okay, but even Samuel, because when Saul failed to kill the king that he had captured, as opposed to what Samuel told him to, okay, Samuel himself killed the king. So, you know, I don't, he was considered a Nazarite, but I'll tell you what, people were really afraid of Samuel. Samuel was a deadly guy, and you know, very genocidal, and not only that, a lot, you know, people elevate Samuel, but Samuel's sons were as corrupt as Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. So he brought corruption into the priesthood as well. But he was a very powerful guy, so powerful that the king feared him. So, I mean, sometimes, you know, sometimes there is a king and sometimes there is a power behind the throne. And what Samuel really did was he withdrew the power behind the throne from Saul and just left him hanging.
So they did allow women to be Nazarites.
Oh, yes, men or women could be Nazarites. Yeah.
I'm just surprised.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't hear about it.
You don't hear about it much.
No.
They don't write about it.
No, I can't recall any female Nazarites listed in Scripture. But there
I Googled
were.
it at some point, I can't remember, it's been a while ago, and I don't remember them naming anybody, but they said that
Yeah.
there were women Nazarites.
I would think that they would have kind of the same status in a society as a nun or a monk would in the Middle Ages. You know, and people respected the office. But for a nun or a monk, that was a lifelong thing. For a Nazarite, it was just for a period of time.
Unless you were Samuel or
Unless you were Samuel or Samson, or, you know, your parents just kind of ruined your life by making you
So
a Nazarite.
when they dedicated them, did they say it was for life?
Yes.
So they didn't have any choice. It's kind of like the priest. assuming that because this is a good priest, their children are gonna be good priests.
Yeah, no, they obviously weren't.
Obviously not.
Yeah. And that's one of the issues. In fact, that's one of the reasons why there was a revolt in AD 70, because the priesthood was appointed by Herod. And, you know, Herod was barely Jewish.
Was he not appointing people that were loyal to him?
He was appointing people who were loyal to him. Yeah. So there was, as far as the general population goes, they did not think that the acting high priest during Jesus' day was a valid candidate for priesthood. So, okay. Here's something that might sound familiar. This is called the priestly benediction. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, Thus you shall bless the Israelites. You shall say to them, The Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace," which is the same benediction that I very often give at the conclusion of a service. "So shall they put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them." So when I do that benediction, I do it with the intention that you will go from that place as the people of God, and that God will bless you.
We used to say part of that at end of all of our NYF
Uh-huh.
when I was growing up.
Yeah. The one that I have kind of a issue with is the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Okay, that was between Jacob and his father-in-law Laban. And that was so that God makes sure that I never see you again, or I'll kill you.
Yeah.
That's what that blessing means.
He had every right to, too.
Yeah. He said, don't show up anymore. The Lord watch between me and thee. Okay. We don't want to see each other ever again. It sounds nice, but it's not really. Okay, now this next section here in chapter 7, I'm going to breeze through it really quick. But if you go through chapter 7 and you see what the leaders, these are the heads of the tribes, have to bring as their, I guess, license fee to be the head of a tribe. Okay, they all have to bring things, and they bring a lot. On the day when Moses had finished setting up the tabernacle and had anointed and consecrated it with all its furnishings, and had anointed and consecrated the altar with all its utensils, the leaders of Israel, heads of their ancestral houses, the leaders of the tribes, who were over those who were enrolled, made offerings. They brought their offerings before the Lord, 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen, a wagon for every 2 of the leaders, and for each one an ox. They presented them before the tabernacle. Okay? Now, then the Lord said to Moses, "Accept these from them, that they may be used in doing the service of the tent of the meeting, and give them to the Levites, to each according to his service." So these are the conveyances for the tabernacle and tent of meeting, for the Levites to load them up and haul them off, okay? So Moses took the wagons and the oxen and gave them to the Levites. 2 wagons and 4 oxen he gave to the Gershonites according to their service, and 4 wagons and 8 oxen he gave to the Merarites according to their service, under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron, the priest. But to the Kohathites they gave none, because they were charged with the care of the holy things that had to be carried on the shoulders. You'll remember there were tables, there was the Ark of the Covenant, and there were rings on those for the poles for them to carry. Those things had to be carried by people. So they didn't give them ox wagons to carry things on. One of the issues that once the ark was captured by the Philistines, and it did some bad things to the Philistines, they wanted to send it back, and they sent it back on an ox cart. And they had 2 calf oxen that hauled it, and they wanted to see whether or not God really wanted this thing to be with the Israelites. So they sent 2 calf oxen that were still nursing to haul this wagon mothers, then God did not want the ark returned. But if they kept on going in spite of their nature, then that was an act of God to send the ark back. But it shouldn't have been on an ox cart anyway. So, anyway. Now, the leaders also presented offerings for the dedication of the altar at the time it was anointed. The leaders presented the offering before the altar. The Lord said to Moses, they shall present their offerings 1 liter each day for the dedication of the altar. Now, take a listen to what these guys are bringing. The one who presented his offering the first day was Nahshon, son of Abinadab, of the tribe of Judah. Judah being the preeminent tribe, Judah being the preeminent place in the United Kingdom, because Judah was where the temple was. Okay. His offering was 1 silver plate weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin weighing 70 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, both of them full of choice flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, 1 golden dish weighing 10 shekels full of incense, 1 young bull, 1 ram, 1 male lamb, a year old, for a burnt offering, 1 male goat for a purification offering, and for the sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs a year old. This was the offering of Nahshon, the son of Amminadab. All right.
I want to ask you a question. What the first day? First day of what?
First day of this whole ceremony where the tribal leaders are consecrated as tribal leaders.
So it's only a one-time event.
Yes, this was a one-time event, but these are people ostensibly eating manna and quail.
Well, so we've been told.
Yes. And what does it take to service an ox in the desert?
Like 20 pounds of feed a day.
20, yeah, that's right. That's right. Plus all the other livestock. Okay? So what are we really talking about? Well, we're not talking about a people out in the wilderness. We're not talking about people who are in a barren land. We're not talking about people who are dependent for God for their daily food so much as manna and quail. So what we're really talking about here is a very settled community. Okay? When you start talking about all those metal objects, well, you know, what does it take to smelt silver and turn it into dishes and all of that stuff? You know, that's not something you do on the march. It's hard to move a kiln. So I'm just, you know, you have to understand that what they're describing here is primarily to say how worship was conducted once they were established.
Once they got there.
Once they got there, yeah.
So the desert where they were, as we've always been thought, was just barren land.
Well, it wasn't terribly barren. It was down near the Red Sea, not far from the Red Sea, or not far actually from the Sea of Reeds. It was near what we call the Port of Eilat today. So it was, you know, not far from water as far as that goes, which if you're in a situation where the land is lush, then it contradicts the idea that these people were in such a desert situation that God had to provide a spring for them. And I mean, one spring for 600,000 people, you know, you know, they had all this livestock, or, you know, if they had nothing, then God provided manna and quail. So there's really a disconnect between the two stories. And this has much more to do with the way the religion was established in Jerusalem, which is the pitch that they're trying to give to the king of Persia.
So he'll let them go.
So he would let them go and reestablish this whole cult religion in Jerusalem.
And he does.
And he does. And he does. It's a very convincing story. Okay? They are also, again, itemizing what was stolen by the Babylonians so they could get it back. So that's, that's kind of how it's working out. Every time they describe an object that was used, they expect to get out of the treasury that the Babylonians stole.
We didn't talk about earlier writings, we discussed this at home, what earlier writings we were referring to.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. During this period, you had the Hebrews the Hebrews had their own alphabet, and they had their own distinctive language, and they were capable of writing down these stories. It wasn't entirely an oral tradition at this point. And when the nation got established, and you had a bureaucracy, especially under David evidently had a whole community of writers and scribes that would collect these things, write them down. But there were texts that were considered sacred texts, but of course at the time of David, you didn't have the Pentateuch laid out like it is in our scripture today or the Jewish scripture today. Back then, it was just a collection of scrolls, stories, and things like that. It wasn't really consolidated until they had to describe who they were and what they were doing to the king of Persia. But they did have what they considered to be sacred text. And they could record what Moses said. That was entirely possible. So what this is not just something that was made up out of whole cloth. This is stuff, when the temple was sacked by the Babylonians, the scrolls the whole library went to Babylon
So,
as well.
make sure I'm hearing you right. They were writing down things even when they were in the desert,
Yeah,
which we kind of thought that they weren't.
No,
was
they
all
were.
Oral, but they were.
They were.
So there was written text
yeah, there were.
of stories.
There were. And the stories about Moses, I'm sure that somebody penned those. You understand that under Moses, they did put together a bureaucracy of religion. So I'm sure there were things down and record things for the temple worship.
I read or heard something that, the Roman Empire destroyed,
They did. They destroyed the temple.
and they stole everything in the temple. And the Roman Catholic Church has a secret compartment where they keep all the stuff that was.
Well, the Vatican has been very good at making collections over conquest. But a lot of this was divided up before the Romans completely annihilated the country. There were refugees who fled, and when they fled, they went to Egypt. And the library at Alexandria contained many of the sacred scrolls from the temple. Okay, a lot of this stuff was squirreled away by who were they? Not the Essenes. I think they were the Essenes, but the Dead Sea Scrolls were based on writings, and they were translated. Okay, because the writings that they had in the temple, a lot of them were not in Hebrew. A lot of them were in Greek. The Bible that Jesus used was in Greek, so it was the Septuagint, and you can see that today. And it was done by Jews in Egypt, who put together 70 scholars put together the Septuagint. That's why it's called Septuagint, because Septuagint means 70. No, there was a lot of issues especially with the Babylonians. Again, there were refugees before Babylon came in. They went to Egypt. They took with them some of the sacred scrolls. They ended up in the library in Alexandria. When they came back, they brought back scrolls from Babylon, and there was a big controversy in the people who came back as to who had the better scrolls. And each one said that the refugees who went to Egypt didn't take the best quality scrolls, that the ones from Babylon were the best quality scrolls, and you get into that stuff. But
Well, the scrolls say different things, or
Yes.
some of the same thing,
they say different things.
different. So who decided who went into these first 5?
The priests and Levites, scribes primarily, the scribal class, were the ones who were most involved in those kinds of discussions.
So they basically decided what was the truth
Yeah,
and what wasn't.
yeah, just like in about 200 AD when the Christian church got councils together and decided which were canonical scriptures and which were not. And about that same time, Judaism also consolidated their writings to determine what was canonical for them as well. So, it's a long process, and most of the time, most of the history behind all of what we have today was not consolidated or entirely certified. That took a process. That took councils, scholars, years to put it all together. So you have different categories in the Christian, the Roman Church accepts the Apocrypha as sacred text, and most Protestants do not. But we use it. There's great history in there. The style of writing is very good for informing how portions of the Bible were written. You can date different parts, especially in the Old Testament. You can date apocryphal writings in the Old Testament to the fact that they did not pertain to that period when the original writer of that prophecy was writing. So you have first, second, third, and more Isaiahs, because Isaiah covers multiple periods of time. The book of Daniel was very apocalyptic, and it was during the intertestamental period. And then the book of Revelation, if you understand apocryphal literature, the book of Revelation is simply an apocryphal Christian book, but it's based on the style of writing that was used in the intertestamental period when people were protesting the occupation of the Greeks. So, you have different ways that people put, the Bible is full of different styles of writing. It's not all the same. And that's a good thing. You have basically histories, you have theology, you have poetry, you have drama, a lot of different ways, and apocryphal writings, which are kind of in their own class. And if you understand it, you don't get nearly as scared when you read the book of Revelation. But it's, there's just a lot of different styles of, so you don't, just go with the flow, figure it out. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to figure it out. Okay, well, we're going to hold it right there. I just want you to know, if you read chapter 7, you will see that they brought a lot of loot to the priests and to the Levites. And there's kind of a contest among the leaders of the tribes of who could bring the most. So they've inventoried all of that. And guess why they inventoried all of that? Because it's a police report.
So each one of these leaders gathered all of this stuff from
Yeah.
their tribe members.
Right.
I want that and that and that and that and that.
That's how leaders do.
Yeah.
That's how leaders do. But there was, understand that they did not necessarily consider it a burden. They considered it a very high honor to be able to offer these things. Okay? In their society, that was not considered to be a grab bag by the priests and the Levites. That was considered to be just a sacred duty to the Lord, an act of thanksgiving. And it was not given in the spirit of it being a burden to the people. It was given in the spirit of generosity and gratitude. Just like when people offer things to the church, a lot of times that's done in a spirit of gratitude, not only to the Lord, but also to somebody who's very dear to them. And it's considered a celebration, not a burden.
Unlike given to the government.
Unlike giving to the government,
Which is not a celebration.
which is not a
It's a burden.
celebration. It is definitely a burden. Okay? I don't see anything here where it says, Moses sent out troops to confiscate these goods. So,
And these were a religious group of people anyway.
everything
So-
in life was connected to their faith.
Yeah.
Everything. Okay, well, thank you much for being here. I think we've gone over a little bit, but that's okay. It's been fun. And I'll see you next week. Enjoy this class.
And speaking of balances,
Yeah.
one went out in the church maybe 50 or 60 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and Hugh Pollock's daddy stood up and said, "Do not